Thanks everyone for joining us for our second hour. We now have a panel from the farm which will focus on growing Supima from a business, quality, and sustainability perspective. We have a great panel joining us today. Let me introduce them to you. First, we have Kirk Gilkey of Gilkey Five, this is of Corcoran, California. Kirk is also chairman of the Supima board. We'll be seeing him tomorrow. He's going to give us a tour of the Cross Creek Gin, so I hope you'll join us for that too. We also have Jake Cauzza Growers of Buttonwillow, California. Earlier today, I hope you were able to join us for that tour that Jake gave us of a Supima farm. Jake is also a Supima board member. And then we have Jason Thomsom, brand development manager at Supima in Arizona. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion today. I'm going to leave the panel and come back with questions from our audience. Just a reminder to our viewers that they can submit questions to the chat. We will do our best to get right back to you to answer your questions, and there'll be some questions that I share with the panel live when we come back for our Q&A. All right, everybody, have a great discussion.
All right, thanks very much, Buxton. We're going to be talking about what it takes to grow cotton, what it takes to grow Supima cotton, challenges and regulations and things that they face moving forward with this very special crop. So to kick it off, I'm going to actually go to our esteemed chairman, and I'm going to ask him to take us through what the timeline looks like for growing Pima or Supima cotton, from looking at the land, putting the seed in the land, and then taking it out of the land. What that process entails, how long it is. If you could just give us an overview of what a farmer needs to do for basically what it looks like a year-long cycle of growing this crop.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason, for those kind words. Every year is different, growing any crop, really. We face lots of challenges, but when you're talking about specifically growing Pima cotton, as we do in the Central Valley of California, the work actually starts well over it's a longer than a year process, because the previous year of the crop, we'll take off a rotation crop such as wheat or safflower, and then we'll start to prepare the soil to get ready for planting of the seed to grow the cotton the following year. So say in June, we'll take the rotation crop off, and then we'll work the ground. And then later in the year, close to the end of the year, in the wintertime or early the following year, we'll irrigate the ground, and we'll get it ready, fill the soil profile with water. We'll drive salts down. We'll put the nutrients back into the ground and get it ready to cultivate during the summer. So that happens. The first pre-irrigation happens in late December, early January, sometimes into February. Then in March, we'll start to prepare the ground. We'll work the soil, and we'll start to get the ground ready to put the seed in. You have to prepare every year. It's very, very difficult to prepare seed bed, because our ground has a lot of varying soil types: clay, sand, silt. And so you have to be very, very careful when you work the ground. You can't work it too wet. If you work it too wet, you get clods, and your seed bed just won't be ideal. So once you've prepared an ideal seed bed in March, in late March or early April, we'll put the seed in the ground. We'll plant the cotton. And then as the time progresses, the seed will germinate and come out of the ground 5 to 10 days, ideally 5 days. If the weather's not so good, it might take 10 days to 2 weeks. We're always watching the weather during planting time, and we have certain tools that really help us to plant during the ideal conditions, and that has to do with the temperature outside, soil temperature, chance for rain in the nearby forecast, And so we follow all those very, very closely to make sure that we have ideal planting conditions. And it's very, very important to get the cotton off to a good start. So we like to have the cotton planted by April 15th, and then we watch it grow until about the 1st of June. And during that period of time, we're watching for pests. We're making sure that we keep all the weeds controlled as best we can. And then sometime in June, we give it its first shot of water. And then we'll irrigate it and cultivate it, manage the pests, manage the weeds throughout the summer until September, when we try to terminate that crop. And we want it to shed its leaves, defoliate, and we want the bolls to open up. We want to have a very, very white field of cotton when we send our cotton pickers in there in October. And we pick the cotton from October through November. And there again, we have to have good weather so we can get the crop picked while it's still dry and in the highest quality condition. Once it gets wet, it starts to deteriorate somewhat. So we want to make sure that we get that cotton picked when it's very, very dry. We put it in a module and get it ready to go to the cotton gin. So that is the growing. Obviously, Jake can add a lot of things that we do. I mean, it's, again, as I said, it's different every year. It's a process. I've been doing it for 40 years, and every year something's been different, and you learn something every year. So it's very, very challenging, and it can be very, very rewarding when you're successful.
Thanks, Kirk. That's great. So, Jake, do you think that was a pretty good overview of the year-long process from planting to harvesting? Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, he explained it perfectly. I think the only thing I would add is that we, in my area, water is by short supply. So when we're deciding what to plant, we keep an eye on what happens in the wintertime, how much water we're going to be supplied with. We also keep an eye on the market. We're able to grow a wide variety of crops. So we keep an eye on the market, and our water supply is a big deal when choosing what side to plant.
All right. You both touched on water, and I think the topic of water is one that is always on the farmer's mind. It might be top of mind all year round for a farmer. Where would you start if we started talking about water?
Well, first of all, you know, we do cherish the water that we have. It's unfortunate that about 2/3 of our water that comes from the mountains in California tends to go out to the ocean. In my opinion, that's not a good practice, but there's certain environmental rules and regulations that force that water out to sea. But water obviously has a price, and I think farmers know that we need to be very responsible for the use of our water. So no water is ever wasted, and it's for a number of reasons. First of all, our state needs all the water that we can have for, you know, human consumption and for agriculture, and so we have to share it. Our water costs money, and so we obviously want to conserve and use the optimum amount of water. Cotton takes approximately 2 acre-feet, which is 650,000 gallons of water per acre to grow a crop, and that's 2.5 million liters to successfully grow a crop of Pima. So we manage our water. We like to say that we use every drop, and I think we do. Without water, you won't have farming. And So we hope that we can continue to have water in the state of California for ag and for, our 40 million people that live in the state.
And Kirk, the things that we're doing with technology, with GPS, with soil monitoring, with satellite imagery, drip lines, sprinklers, and stuff, we're trying to save as much water as we possibly can because we know it's in short supply. So for us as farmers, we know it's in short supply. So we're working our best to save as much water. No water goes unused, and the technology that we're using every year is getting better and helping us out as much as possible.
Right. So it seems like every year a farmer's job is also to know, what you will be allotted for, let's say, water usage, and then grow the most efficient crop with what you have available to you.
Jason, we, at one time in the state of California, there was probably 1 million acres of cotton grown. It was very successful. There was probably 3 million bales. We're down to 200,000 acres and 600,000 to 700,000 bales grown in the state. So from 3 million down to well under 1 million, closer to 500,000. The economics have changed. Regulations have changed. We've gone to more, I would say, economically beneficial crops, permanent crops. Both Jake and I have permanent crops that we grow, trees, and we grow grapes. And so those are taking the place of once we grew cotton. Now, cotton, in my opinion, still has its place, especially Pima cotton has its place in the Central Valley of California. Right now, there's a lot of things that make it not so attractive, but I think that we will be able to produce Pima in our area for some time to come, but we're going to have to deal with a lot of factors, and we're going to have to put our management hats on and be successful at it. But in my opinion, and this is my 41st year of being a cotton farmer, you can see what happens. That's a young cotton farmer over there, and I'm the old grizzled veteran. But it gets tougher. It used to be a lot more fun, but it's still rewarding, and we hope to be around for a while in this business.
Right, and you talked about both Jake and yourself growing permanent crops. It would probably be worthwhile talking about the permanent crops versus the rotational crops, which a cotton would be, and then we can come back and touch on growing Pima. Obviously, you need to grow something that is of a higher value and a premium crop, from what I'm hearing. Based on the finite resources, the input costs of those resources, you're going to need to make sure that what's yielding out of the ground is something that fetches a better price from an economic standpoint. And that is where permanent crops come in, which is what you also both grow, correct?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, and permanent crops would be pistachio trees, almond trees, those sort of things?
Yeah, and I guess Kirk has some grapes too. We have almonds and pistachios, and when it comes to growing a permanent crop, there's a lot of things that go into it. Pistachio crop, you put in 7 years of work, 8 years of work until you get your first crop off. Almonds, 3 or 4 years. Also, a permanent crop needs water every single year. Cotton is rotational. In 2014, 2015, in one of my districts, we did not get any water delivery. So, permanent crops, you need to have water every single year, and that's the risk you're taking when planting a permanent crop rather than a rotational crop that if worse came to worse and emergency happened, you didn't have water that year, you will be able to survive instead of having to take out trees. Like in my area in 14 and 15, there were almonds taken out left and right, and it's a hard sight to see.
Just developing permanent crops will cost you $10,000 to $15,000 an acre, depending. And so if you're going to go to the bank is going to make you basically guarantee that you have water, so they won't be stuck with a bad loan. So just like Jake said, wherever we have our permanent crops, and mine are pistachios and wine grapes, we've had to guarantee the bank that for a high degree of certainness that we will have water. And again, with the ever-changing regulation, sometimes that puts those guarantees into peril. But what will happen is you will use your ground that is not in permanent crops. You'll take that water away to keep your permanent crops growing and thriving. And so that will put more pressure on your open ground to where you have the rotational crops, such as wheat and Pima, that we, so far have done pretty well keeping it growing in the central part of California.
Right, and the practice then looks like you would allot what you're able to make sure, as you just to repeat what you're saying there, Kirk, is that you're going to make sure that your permanent crops can be fed, and then you have a certain amount of rotational land, and that's where that decision comes in, whether or not you're going to plant wheat or Pima. And again, that is based on an economic decision for the farmer, and also sounds like you would look at how much water you have left and whether or not you'll be able to sustain that plant at a sufficient level or yield, is what I'm understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so we have to make sure we have to determine our water supply, and then we allocate for permanent crops, and then whatever we have left over, we'll grow whatever, and then we'll grow whatever we can with the water we have left. And unfortunately, as time goes by, there'll be more ground that has to be fallowed. We have certain, pending regulation that is going to create a situation that there will be in this area more and more prime, high quality farm ground that just won't be in production. And it's sad, but that's the way things are moving.
And that's due to allotment of water and also regulation of the farming industry itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Allotment of water.
Okay. Yeah,
it is absolutely 100% water.
Yeah.
SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. There are certain areas that are not within a district, and they're going to have a tough time staying afloat, keeping farming.
Well, we're competing. We're competing with more citizens in the state all the time for the water, and it's just a fact that obviously agriculture would rank second to human consumption. So I hope my children and my grandchildren will still have agriculture in this state, because I think it's important. I think it's important for a number of reasons. Environmentally, what we can do to keep this state healthy, you need agriculture, and it would be a real tragedy if agriculture goes away.
Right. It's an interesting topic that you use the word consumption, that first and foremost we have to make sure that the citizens can consume, but in order to consume they also need agriculture to consume. So it's a really circular discussion that as long as we keep driving this need for the food and fiber, and the demand, we keep also squeezing the amount of resources that a farmer is allotted every year to make the same amount or more of the food and fiber that is required for consumption by the citizens. So that's a really interesting topic to discuss when we look at, sustainability, and that word that's being thrown around a lot. Really, you could look at it as a way of using the resources to create the highest value that you can, the finite resources that you have to create something that has the highest value you possibly can, is sustaining agriculture. And from what you have discussed already so far this morning, it seems like that is just the practice of a California or Supima farmer. That really, if you want to be a sustainable farm, then you have to practice that at its utmost use. And really, that's what I'm hearing a lot. You touched on Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, Jake, and I believe that's also called SGMA. And just to loop it back around on water, we won't spend too much more time on it, but that's also a new regulation that's come in order to maintain the groundwater in California, right? And when Kirk said that, we used to own water, that is where this has come in and said, even the wells that you would use for supplemental water is now under control by the state regulation, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks very much for talking about that thing. We want to move on, of course, to cultivating it, growing it. Rotational crops are very important to a farm. From what I understand, that it's also very important to maintain soil health, and a word that's being used a lot again that we're seeing out there is regenerative farming. I would maintain that is what you gentlemen and the other Pima farmers just do. It's not a new topic to you. And rotational farm practices, they do help with making sure that you're growing the most efficient crop that you can. Could you touch a bit on soil and how rotational farming and planting Pima helps with soil, or what sort of practices that you put in place?
For sustainability, you touched on it earlier. We're growing cotton on the same ground that my great grandfather grew cotton on. 90 years we've been around, and if we didn't practice sustainability and good practices to our soil, we wouldn't be able to do that. We grow Supima cotton, and then we can rotate it with a vegetable, and mixing those two together will just keep the ground a little bit healthier. Tilling the ground, we try to do a little tillage as possible, and like these new technologies that we're using, GPS is just keeping the ground healthier every year. We're getting better at taking care of the ground, and like I said, we wouldn't be able to farm for 90 years on the same piece of ground if we weren't good caretakers of it.
Jake and I, although we're different ages, I'm third generation. My family immigrated here from Canada in 1922, so we've farmed some of the same ground for almost 100 years, and we grow cotton, Supima. We grow it 1 year, and then we'll take it out of the rotation and either grow safflower or wheat or another rotational crops, because as Jake said, that keeps the soil healthy. And we've found if we grow cotton 2 years in a row, Pima 2 years in a row, we lose production. And one of the things that we do in the Central Valley of California that is better than most places across the Cotton Belt, not every place across the Cotton Belt, but we make high production here. And to grow the most cotton on the smallest area, as you said, Jason, be efficient. That's our goal. We want to make the highest production per acre because that's where the biggest returns are. That's where we are the most responsible and the most sustainable. Sustainable means you have to be good to the environment. You have to be good to your employees, but you also, to be sustainable, you have to grow a crop that you can carry on into the future. So we have to have a price that is sustainable, and we have to have production that is sustainable. And our input cost can't be so high that it becomes sustainable and profitable. Can have somewhat of the same meaning, although sustainable can go into other areas, when you talk about the environment. So I think because we have high production, we are very much, I got that same fly that got our vice president the other day is getting me right now. I think we're being responsible and sustainable when we try to be very efficient and grow the best crop and the highest production crop that we can grow.
Right. So yield. Yield is definitely an important piece of it, because we talk about economics and that we live in a system where you are providing the raw material that is needed to be turned into product that is then sold to consumers and so on and so forth, which is the economics of the system that we live in. And you are looking at finite resources and infinite demand. So to produce the highest possible yield with the lowest possible input costs and use of resources, that would be in a way and a good definition of being sustainable. So thanks for taking us through that, Kirk, because I think that's an important point, that efficiency of yield and the amount of fiber that you can get out of an acre while being restricted on the amount of resources you can use is what we're striving for here. And I think that's a really important point for the audience. So a couple more things we want to touch on. I think it's important that we do spend just a small amount of time on pesticides, and then we can take that discussion into another sort of realm. But pesticide use is a important part of farming. It's also something I believe that is being misinformed in some of the claims that are being made out in the marketplace as to what harmful pesticides are and how pesticide use is applied in precision agriculture like Supima farming. Obviously, it's a reality of farming. You're going to need to stick to those timelines. You're going to need to, battle weather and pest pressure and these sort of things. But pesticide use is another highly regulated and also something that is a very large input cost to a farmer. So really what you're looking at is the use of pesticides from your standpoint. Again, how little can we use? Where can we apply it? And what's the best way to apply it to make sure that I'm growing the most efficient and highest yielding crop? So could you just touch a little bit on pesticide use and some of the things that you've seen out there?
Kirk and I both grow in California, so we are highly regulated here, and there are certain pesticides that we're unable to use, other states are. So we stick by the law, and obviously, like you said, the input cost gets really high. I mean, they are not inexpensive items, so the less we can spray, the better. And it's all dependent on the weather, the pests bring the weather brings the pests. And talking to Kirk earlier, I know he had a higher pest year. Last year, our pests were really high. This year, we weren't so bad. So, I mean, it's all dependent on what they bring, but we stick to the California regulations, and we're highly regulated here. So we're using what they let us use.
We don't want to use pesticides. If we could use zero, that would be perfect. But unfortunately, we wouldn't have a crop. We couldn't make the high production that we strive for. And there's certain pests that we tend to get at the end of the year that if we had a good crop out there and the whitefly or aphid came in and we didn't control those, those bugs, those pests secrete a sugar onto the fiber of the plant that makes it impossible to manufacture. So if you try to take it to, well, you actually can't even take it through the cotton gin. But if you can get it through the cotton gin, then you try to take it to a textile mill, it's impossible to use. So it renders our summer's work useless, basically, because it just it can't be turned into the yarn that we need to make the fabric that turns into the clothes and the towels and the sheets. So, Jason, we don't like to use pesticides, don't want to use them. The pesticides we use, we spray them on, and then in 24 hours, they've dissipated to where they don't cause any danger when you have human exposure. Some are 24 hours, some are 48 hours, and some are 72 hours. So these pesticides that we use dissipate very rapidly compared to some of the pesticides we've had in the past that are no longer, as Jake said, we can't use them in California, as we have the highest regulated pesticide situation anywhere in the world. So there's chemicals in other states across the Cotton Belt that can be used that we can't use in California, and certainly in other countries they use pesticides that we outlawed 50 years ago. So anyway, it's a management issue, and again, if we could use zero pesticides, we would.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of these things where you're applying it where it's needed and not applying it where it's not. Sounds simple, but it's something that perhaps in other cotton growing areas around the world isn't a practice. But one thing I've learned is that there's precision application, especially in the U.S. and in Supima farms specifically. You find through Jake's description of technology and GPS and things of that nature, you can find pest hotspots, right? And you only need to apply then a small amount of the pesticide to that area, and you leave the rest of the crop alone. Would that be correct?
Yeah, during our growing season, we have multiple pest control advisors walking our fields and checking to see how many pests. I mean, we'll check one day, and depending on how many pests are out there, we're thinking about spraying something, we'll check again just to make sure they're still there. But the population is a big deal, and we use a minimum amount that we have to.
Jason, we also use what they call soft chemistry, which would be pesticides that aren't harmful to beneficial bugs. In other words, we have bugs out there that eat the bad bugs, and so we want to make sure that we pay close attention to the number of predators, which are the good bugs that prey on the ones that damage our cotton. And so we try to keep them alive. And so the soft chemistry would be pesticides that are very soft on the good bugs. So there's a lot that goes into it. Guys way smarter than us that we have as consultants that help us in their field, which is pest management. So we have good people out there, and again, for a number of reasons, we only spray when we need to, and hopefully as few times as we can get by with, and still be efficient growing your crop, and maximize the production. I was talking to Jake, and we have 3 different little ranches, and the ranch on the north side, we had very little bug pressure, but the ranch, for some reason in the middle, we had heavy bug pressure. So that's where we had to concentrate our applications, and that unfortunately will be probably some of our least productive ground this year. So where you have to spray a lot, you tend to not be as successful, for sure.
Right, and again, you're trying to just manage the pressure to a reasonable level so that you can, again, get the most you can out of those areas. You talked about specific soft chemistry, which is, I think, really interesting too, because now we get into the another term out there, synthetic pesticides, which has been used disparagingly, I think, in some cases where maybe organic practices are being promoted. However, synthetic pesticides are very important because they're specific to the pest you're going to kill and leaves everything else alone. And again, only applied where needed. That's something that can't really be accomplished with a natural pesticide. And again, I would imagine that it's the research and development that goes into these practices that says there's a better way to do this. And what we've come up with is this soft chemistry, as you explained, Kirk, to just get rid of the pest you need and keep everything else safe.
That's
Pretty good.
we use, but I mean, we use a lot of the different chemicals we use are pyrethroids, which are basically, you could probably help me with that, but they're dried up dead bugs that that are actually bad for the live bugs. So we use, as you said, we manage with the different types of tools that we are left with. Again, we lose tools every year, and when I say tools, I mean certain types of pesticides. One thing that, and we're probably going to talk a little bit about organic. I'm not going to be disparaging on organic because I know it works for certain parts of the country and for certain farmers. We tend to like to use the term sustainable, but there are certain organic chemicals that are used when growing organic crops. But I think you'll find that some of those organic chemicals will stay viable and poison for longer in the atmosphere than do the pesticides that we use that dissipate and are safe for human exposure after 24, 48, or 72 hours. Again, you could get a real debate on that, and I'm not the person to debate it, but I know organic has its place, but I'm going to be a sustainable farmer for as long as I continue on my journey through this world.
Jake, anything to add on pesticide use or any of those things that we talked about?
No, I mean, Kirk and I spoke earlier about organic use, and I'm not extremely familiar with organic use, but everything he said, I mean, like you said, 24, 48 hours, and it dissipates and it's gone. When you're using organic pesticides, they're in the atmosphere for a lot longer. And also, when we're talking about carbon emissions and driving a tractor through the field multiple times when you're using when you're in an organic farm compared to if you can spray it one time with a pesticide rather than having to drive a tractor 25 times or 5 times through a field. I mean, I'm not extremely familiar with organic, but the way we do it is definitely sustainable. And like we said, with a 28, 48 hour interval, we're taking all the precautions necessary.
Right. Just because something is deemed natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. So I think that that's also an interesting thing to ponder when pondering these natural versus synthetic chemicals. Also, another thing that I've learned diving into this industry with you guys is all pesticide use in California has to be registered and reported and is available for public whenever they would like it. Anybody in California can request a pesticide that was used specifically in your county. So everything as far as transparency goes is available for the general public to view as to what is being done on the farms in California, and that's by law. And I found that very interesting because it's like no other place. If you want to know exactly to the drop what pesticides were used and when on either of your farms, anybody can just go and find that. They just have to go to your county website, and I've never seen that level of transparency in the industry. So it speaks to the progress that has been made in the U.S. system. So moving on, we just want to not take up too much more time, but I think that it's important we talk. You talked about carbon emissions. I think that verdant agriculture provides carbon offset itself and is very important to that. We're obviously, you guys are managing that to the utmost degree as well with how you go about harvesting. It's mechanized harvesting, 100%, and then you want to make basically as little amounts of trips you can with machinery, as Jake mentioned, and also the journey from harvesting to module to the gin. That again has been done to the utmost efficiency. So if you could just give us a few details on the harvesting process, and then we'll talk a little bit more about organic and things like that, and I think we'll wrap it up. But just wanted to touch on the harvest just a little bit, and if we could tell everybody the process of harvesting.
So as I said earlier, in the month of October, September and October, we terminate the cotton plant. When it opens, and we do use chemical defoliation to open the cotton and to get the leaves to fall off. You need as little trash on the plant, and I mean dry leaves, and part of the organic material that goes with the growing of the crop. You need as much off that plant when you take your mechanical harvester into the field. Over the years, we've gone from pickers that had baskets that you dumped into trailers. When I was a young guy, Jake won't remember ever using trailers, but I remember using trailers. And then from trailers, we went to ricks, was basically you dump the cotton on the ground and you covered it with a tarp. After ricks, the invention of the module was one of the greatest things that ever happened to the cotton industry. Basically, you make 20,000 pounds of compressed cotton that you can pick up and you can transport by truck. And so that made the storage of lint that when it gets wet is damaged. So when it's compressed like that, it won't absorb water. So you can put a cover on it and you can store it for 30 to 60 days. Today, further technology, that module is actually made, whereas before it was made by another piece of equipment, it's made by the cotton picker. So the cotton picker actually picks the cotton, and then it forms a round module that I'm sure there'll be pictures of that people can see. Then 4 to 6 of those to 8 of those are moved to the gin together. And it's from where we've come from cotton trailers to the cotton picker that makes its own module it's been in the last 50 years, is been really good for the cotton industry, really good. There's a lot of things that have happened in our area that allow us to continue to grow cotton, one of them introducing Pima, which is a more valuable crop than short staple cotton. But moduling has made our job so much better.
And I would say, talking about the updated technology, 2-row cotton picker to a 4-row to a 5-row to a 6-row with similar engines, putting out similar, actually probably a cleaner burning engine. And so just efficiency is what we're all about, you know.
Right. And sorry, go ahead, Kirk.
Well, as Jake said, I mean, the first pickers were actually converted. They were tractors that were converted, and they would put one picker head on. And then so you would have to have, I can remember at one time we had 18 cotton pickers. They were 18 two-row cotton pickers. And, you know, now we have 3 6-rows, and we pick the same amount of cotton. And so, as Jake mentioned, you want to go across that ground you want to make as few trips as you can. You want to use as little fuel, which in turn creates a situation where you have less emissions. And so everything that is evolved in the cotton industry is moving towards a cleaner environment.
Harvest to module. Modules are then brought to the gin. We'll get into ginning later on. I think, Kirk, you're going to take us through a tour of the gin, but those modules are identified as per every section that they come out of, what field. They're in essence traced or tagged for that field. They're brought to the gin, and then the bales that are made out of that module are then tagged with a permanent bale identification for what section and what field they came out of. And that's a system that's been employed by the U.S. for many, many years, and is also one that set the standard in the industry. So that takes us through the process of harvesting and some of the challenges that you guys see. As we go forward and you look to the future, you know, you both touched on it. You speak very passionately about cotton. Are you going to continue to grow cotton?
I mean, I would definitely say absolutely. We have been growing cotton, Pima cotton, for almost 30 years, cotton for quite a ways over that. You know, in California, it's getting tough. We're going to have to figure out this water situation. This year has been tough on the market, and I don't plan on going anywhere. I know I got a long ways to go to be as successful as him, but I don't plan on going anywhere. And my family has been growing cotton for as long as I've been alive, and I want to continue that tradition.
Well, I hope I can. I'm not going to grow it for as long as Jake is, just because there's a joke that we all tell with all the regulations we face in this day and age. We go to the meetings, and most of the news is sometimes pretty negative. So one of the things we always say, well, I'm glad I'm old because I don't have to do this very much longer. But I'm going to keep on trying. We need some things to change. We realize that we're going to be highly regulated, and we're going to deal with that. And we know that water is going to be an issue, and we're going to lose water. It's a fact. The one thing that has to happen in the very near future for us to continue to grow Pima, we need better prices. The price right now where it is about break even, and we can't take the risk that we take to break even. We have to pay our employees. We have to put food on our tables, and so right now the price is low, but the prices go up and down with varying factors, supply and demand, obviously. But currently, the price, and a farmer is going to say the price is always too low. But right now, the price is really too low. We can't grow it for what we're selling Pima for. It's a lot better than upland cotton or short staple cotton, but we have high input costs in the state of California just because things cost a lot more. Cost a lot more to do business state of California. Since I came back from school, our input cost of growing from the time we start the crop to the time we take it all the way through the gin. When I first came back 40 years ago, it was about $750 an acre. Now it's over $2,200 an acre, and we still basically get somewhat the same prices that we were 40 years ago. Now, we didn't grow Pima here 40 years ago. We started growing Pima, California, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And that's one of the reasons that we still grow cotton in California, is because we have a higher value fiber crop. The second thing is we've just become more efficient, and we make higher production, and we do a better job. And so there's a lot of things in the future that could stop us, but I hope that we can continue on and grow cotton well into the future. We have lots of gins that we have an infrastructure that once it's gone, it won't come back. At one time in the state of California, we had 400 gins, and now we're down to under 20. So there's an infrastructure that's going away. What we have, we can manage the growth that we have now, but once it goes away, it won't come back. So I'm hopeful that the California Pima industry can survive. It's got challenges.
Wow, gentlemen, I hate to come in and interrupt. You've had such a great discussion. I think it's been really beneficial for our audience. I do hate to jump in, but I do have some questions that have come in from the audience. Just asking, so there's not just fiber that's harvested. Can you tell, what happens to the other products? What happens to the seed? What happens to the plant material? Are they used, or do they just get discarded?
Well, the process of ginning is basically cleaning the cotton, cleaning the plant residue out, and then the main job that a cotton gin does is separate the fiber from the seed. The seed has value. It's used either for oil, can be used for cottonseed oil for cooking, or in our case, the big use is feed for dairies or beef cattle, mostly for dairies. So it does have great value there, and provides a great energy source to milk-producing cows. The waste, we call it gin trash, would be the sticks and the leaves, the dried leaves that come into the gin, and the burrs. A burr is actually where the boll existed and where the cotton fiber comes from. We set that out on the south side of the gin, and then we'll have trucks come in and pick it up, and they'll take it to dairies or feed yards, and it provides very nice bedding for the cattle. So it'll soak up moisture, and cattle have a much more favorable place to habitate.
So this is these products, the plant material, the seed. These have real values, and these factor, highly into your business considerations when you're looking at the crop.
Yeah, it used to be you would think that cotton seed would cover your ginning costs, but in this day and age, it does a little bit more, because we do have the dairy outlet that is provided more utility to the cotton seed. And so when you grow a crop of cotton, 100% of all of it is consumed. Nothing goes to waste. It ends up either being clothes, sheets, towels, or it'll be cooking oil, or it'll help produce milk at dairies. Then it also helps with living conditions for the cattle at the dairy or in feed yards. So it's all used.
Wow, so it really would be true to say that cotton is a food crop. People say, well, why are you growing fiber, not food? So you really are growing a food crop when you grow Supima. Well, I think we've had a really great session. We're very appreciative of the panel and all the great open discussion we had today. We hope that has been insightful for our audience. And so I'd like to thank Kirk and Jake and Jason for joining us. This really helped, I think, advance the idea of how Supima and why Supima is so special. And so we'll thank you all for this great discussion. Thank you very much. So here's where we end day one of our 3-day symposium. Tomorrow, during our first hour, we're going to focus on the processing of Supima, starting off with a virtual gin visit, which Kirk Gilkey, who we just heard from on the sustainability panel, he will be leading us on that virtual visit. And then we'll take a visit to a classing office where each cotton from each individual Supima bale is reviewed and classed according to quality. In our second hour, after a short break, we're going to have a supply chain panel focusing on authenticity and traceability. Thank you all for joining us for today's sessions. We hope you have a great rest of the day and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks again.